Have you ever felt like you had to wear a mask just to get through the day? Well, imagine wearing a whole pile of them, each one for a different part of who you are, all layered on top of each other. Today, we're going to dive into that deeply layered and often hidden experience at the intersection of being autistic and transgender. We'll explore how this act of camouflaging becomes so much more complex, using personal stories and some really fascinating research.
This quote from an autistic trans person named Porter just gets right to the heart of it all. It paints this picture of suffocation, right? Of being totally trapped. And it's this incredible pressure, this weight that comes from living under all those layers of performance that we're going to unpack.
So, first things first, let's talk about what this performance actually is. The technical term you'll see is camouflaging, but honestly, it's so much more than just trying to blend in. For a lot of people, it's a daily act of survival in a world that, wasn't really built for them.
And it's really important to get that camouflaging isn't passive. It's not just hiding in the background. The sources describe it as this constant, active process. I mean, can you imagine consciously managing every single move you make, suppressing parts of yourself while performing others, just to navigate social situations that have all these unwritten, neurotypical rules?
Okay, so researchers tend to break this down into two main strategies. On one hand, you've got masking, which is all about covering up your natural autistic traits, like, say, fighting the urge to fidget or flap your hands. And then there's compensating, where you're actively performing behaviors to make things go smoother, like forcing yourself to make eye contact or using a social script you've memorized. Both of these take a massive amount of effort all the time. So the big question is, why? Why is this constant performance so necessary for so many autistic people? Well, there's a theory called monotropism that gives us a really powerful way to understand what's going on inside the autistic mind.
Okay, so how does this work? Imagine your attention is a light source. The research describes a polytropic or non-autistic mind as having this kind of diffuse light, spreading its attention across a whole bunch of interests at once. But a monotropic mind? That's different. It focuses attention like an intense, powerful torch beam, concentrating deeply on just a few interests at a time.
And this quote just captures the result of that torch beam perfectly. Inside that beam of light, you've got hyper-awareness, total, intense focus. But everything outside of it, there's hypo-awareness. This attention tunnel, as they call it, can make it incredibly hard to process subtle social cues or shift your focus to things that neurotypical people might just take for granted. And that is a huge reason why camouflaging becomes such a necessary tool.
All right, let's switch gears and look at this from a totally different angle, this time from social phenomenology. There's a concept from the philosopher Simone de Beauvoir that really helps us understand what all this constant self-monitoring feels like on the inside.
So, de Beauvoir introduced this idea she called doubling. She used it to describe how under a patriarchal gaze, women are often forced to be two things at once: a subject, their own self, and an object, the image of themselves being watched by others. They basically become both the surveyor and the surveyed.
And this exact same dynamic applies perfectly to autistic people. They're constantly surveying their authentic, neurodivergent self against this neurotypical persona they're performing for everyone else. It creates this constant, completely draining state of self-surveillance.
Okay, this is where things get really, really complex. What happens when the experience of being autistic collides with the experience of being trans? The effect isn't just 1 + 1, it's exponential.
Remember that feeling of suffocation we started with? For autistic trans people, the masks don't just sit next to each other. They pile up, one on top of the other, creating this heavy, tangled stack of performances that can even clash with each other.
The research suggests thinking about this in layers. So you start with the doubled self, surveying your autistic self versus your neurotypical mask. Then, for a trans person, you add another layer, a tripled self, where you're surveying your physical body against your internal sense of gender. Now combine all of that, and you get what they call a quadrupled or even quintupled self, managing all these layers of surveillance at the same time. It's a lot.
And as you can imagine, keeping up this unbelievably complex, multi-layered performance doesn't come for free. It takes a profound and often devastating toll on a person's mental and emotional energy. This personal account from someone named Devin really puts that cost into stark terms. The sheer amount of mental energy it takes to keep these artificial presentations going can lead to complete, debilitating exhaustion, even after just a little bit of socializing. It's like your body is sending a very clear message. This performance just isn't sustainable. And the research absolutely backs this up, no question. Study after study shows a direct link between high levels of camouflaging and a significantly higher risk for serious mental health challenges. We're talking depression, anxiety, and even suicidality.
And here's the really painful irony in all of this. When you spend all your energy performing identities for other people, it can become almost impossible to figure out who you really are underneath it all. The very mask you wear to fit in can actually stop you from getting an autism diagnosis or from realizing and exploring your true gender identity.
So, what's the way out of this exhausting cycle of performance? The sources all seem to point in one direction. It's about recognizing and honoring the authentic self that exists beneath all of those layers.
Both personal stories and biological research are pointing to the same truth. Gender identity isn't a performance. It's not a choice. It's a deeply wired, innate part of our neurology. And no amount of social pressure can ever erase that fundamental part of who a person is.
And this quote just illustrates the path forward so brilliantly. The journey isn't about getting better at wearing the mask. It's about having the courage to let it go. It's a process of detaching your own self-worth from what other people think, and instead grounding it in your own internal truth.
Which really leaves us with this final, crucial question. And it's a question not just for autistic, trans individuals, but for anyone who has ever felt that pressure to hide who they are. What becomes possible when we redirect all of that energy away from performing for others and instead pour it into simply being ourselves?